The warm morning sun filtered through the towering windows of Peterson and Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. Maya and Kira Johnson, identical twin sisters with brilliant legal minds, sat in their shared corner office. "Oh, look at this one," Maya said, her voice tight with concern as she passed another file to her sister. "Fifth complaint this month about Judge Harrison's behavior." Kira leaned forward, her perfectly pressed suit rustling as she took the document. The sisters, both 32 years old, had graduated at the top of their class from Harvard Law School. While they looked identical with their high cheekbones, warm brown skin, and keen dark eyes, their personalities complemented each other perfectly. Maya was the fiery strategist, while Kira was the methodical planner. The complaints about Judge William Harrison had started trickling in 3 months ago. At first, they seemed like isolated incidents. Black defendants claiming unfair treatment in his courtroom, but as more cases piled up, a disturbing pattern emerged. "Listen to this," Kara said, reading from the latest complaint. "Judge Harrison spoke to me like I was a child, assuming I couldn't understand basic legal terms. When I tried to explain my situation, he cut me off and said, 'Let's keep this simple for everyone's benefit.'" Maya's fingers drummed against her desk. "It's not just the condescending attitude. Look at these sentencing patterns." She pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer. Black defendants consistently receive harsher sentences in his courtroom. The numbers don't lie. The sisters had built their reputation on taking on difficult cases and fighting for justice. Their office walls displayed numerous awards and recognition for their work in civil rights law. But this situation was different. Judge Harrison was careful. His behavior was subtle enough to avoid obvious misconduct, but clear enough to intimidate and discriminate against black defendants in his courtroom. "We need concrete evidence," Kara said, "always the practical one. Something that can't be explained away or dismissed." Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the Boston skyline. Suddenly, she turned around, her eyes sparkling with an idea. "What if we gathered evidence firsthand?" Kara raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "We become our own witnesses. Create a fake case, appear in his courtroom as defendants." Maya's voice trailed off as she saw her sister's expression change from skepticism to interest. "You want us to go undercover?" Kara asked, her legal mind already analyzing the possibilities and potential pitfalls. "Exactly." Maya sat back down, excitement building in her voice. "We create watertight aliases, file a civil case that would land in his courtroom. We dress differently, act differently, become exactly the kind of people he underestimates." Kyra was already taking notes. "We need to ensure everything is legally sound, document every interaction, every word." "And when the time is right," Maya continued, "we reveal who we really are. Show him and the world that his prejudices aren't just morally wrong, they're making him look like a fool." The sisters spent the next hour discussing the details. They would need help from trusted colleagues, airtight documentation, and a foolproof plan. By lunchtime, Operation Exposure was taking shape. They decided to pose as sisters running a small cleaning business with a dispute over a contract. It was simple enough to be believable, but complex enough to require multiple court appearances. They would dress in simple clothes, do their hair differently, and adopt slight changes in their speech patterns. "This could end his career if we do it right," Kara said, reviewing their notes. Maya nodded solemnly. "It's not about ending his career. It's about ensuring justice is truly blind. How many lives has he affected with his prejudice? How many people has he hurt?" As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across their office, the sisters began making calls to their most trusted colleagues. They would need help to pull this off: legal documentation, witness verification, and backup plans for every possible scenario. 2 weeks, Maya said finally. "We get everything in place and file the case in 2 weeks." Kyra nodded, already creating a timeline on her tablet. 2 weeks to become completely different people. As they left the office that evening, both sisters felt the weight of what they were about to undertake. It wasn't just about exposing one prejudiced judge. It was about standing up for every person who had faced discrimination in the justice system. They'd had the skills, the resources, and most importantly, the determination to see it through. Little did Judge William Harrison know, but his worst nightmare was about to walk into his courtroom, disguised as exactly the kind of people he loved to look down upon. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya and Kira Johnson transformed themselves completely. Gone were the designer suits and perfectly styled hair. Instead, they chose simple, slightly worn clothes from discount stores and styled their hair in basic ponytails. They practiced speaking with slight changes in their usual polished vocabulary, careful not to overdo it. "How do I look?" Maya asked, turning around in their apartment. She wore faded jeans, a plain blue t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers. Her normally straightened hair was pulled back in a simple braid. Kyra, dressed similarly in khaki pants and a white blouse, studied her sister critically. "Perfect. No one would guess you graduated top of our class at Harvard." She adjusted her own glasses, which now had plain frames instead of her usual designer ones. Their fake cleaning business, Sisters Spotless Services, had been carefully created with all the necessary paperwork. They had rented a small office space in a modest part of town and hired a few part-time workers to make it look legitimate. Everything had to be real enough to stand up to scrutiny. The case they created was simple but clever. They would claim that a wealthy client had refused to pay for services rendered, claiming poor quality work. The amount in dispute was just enough to land in Judge Harrison's civil court. "Remember," Kara said, reviewing their backstory one last time, "we're Maya and Kira Williams, not Johnson. We started our cleaning business 3 years ago after working for other companies. We'd never been to college, but we've worked hard to build our small business." Their trusted colleague, Sarah Chen, had helped create the perfect paper trail. Bank statements, business licenses, and client records, all legitimate but carefully crafted to fit their story. Even their fake driver's licenses felt real in their hands. "The first hearing is tomorrow at 10 a.m., Maya said, checking their documentation one last time. "We need to arrive early, look nervous but determined." That evening, they met with their small team of confidants at a private room in a quiet restaurant. Besides Sarah, only 3 other people knew about their plan: James Peterson, their firm's senior partner; Detective Marcus Rodriguez, who would ensure their safety; and Rachel Thompson, a court clerk who would help monitor Judge Harrison's reactions. "Everything's in place," James said, his usual booming voice kept low. "The recording devices are undetectable, and we have backup plans for every scenario." Detective Rodriguez added, "I'll have plainclothes officers in the courthouse, just in case. Though I doubt Harrison would do anything openly aggressive." "Remember," Rachel cautioned, "Harrison's smart. He's been on the bench for 15 years. His discrimination is subtle. It's in his tone, his expressions, the way he interrupts certain people." The sisters nodded. They had studied hours of courtroom footage, noting Harrison's patterns. He never used openly racist language, but his behavior told the story. The way he spoke down to black defendants, his impatient sighs, his quick dismissals of their arguments. Back at their apartment that night, the sisters did one final review. They had rented a modest car to replace their luxury vehicles. Their phones had been switched for basic models. Even their watches were now simple digital timepieces instead of their usual expensive brands. "Are you nervous?" Kara asked, watching Maya pace their living room. "Not nervous," Maya replied, stopping by the window. "Just eager to get started. Think about all the people he's hurt over the years, all the lives he's affected with his prejudice." Kyra nodded, understanding her sister's passion. They had both faced discrimination in their careers, despite their impressive credentials. But they had the resources and knowledge to fight back. Many of Harrison's victims didn't. "Tomorrow, we're just 2 hard-working sisters trying to save their small business," Kira reminded her. "We need to be perfect in our roles." They spent the rest of the evening practicing their slightly altered speech patterns and mannerisms. Every detail mattered, from the way they walked to how they addressed the court. As they prepared for bed, Maya looked at their transformed reflections in the bathroom mirror. 2 weeks ago, we were high-powered attorneys. Tomorrow, we become the people Judge Harrison loves to belittle. Kara squeezed her sister's shoulder, "And when this is over, we'll make sure he never does it again." Setting their alarms for early morning, the sisters went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would be the beginning of something important. Their plan was in motion, and Judge William Harrison's day of reckoning was approaching, one careful step at a time. At 9:30 a.m. sharp, Maya and Kira entered courtroom 4B of the Boston Municipal Court. They purposely sat in the back row, watching as other cases were called before theirs. The sisters noticed how Judge Harrison's demeanor shifted depending on who stood before him, warm and patient with some, curt and dismissive with others. The courtroom itself was imposing, with its high ceilings and dark wood panels. Judge William Harrison sat elevated above everyone else, his silver hair and stern expression making him look like he had stepped out of a law textbook. His reputation for running a strict courtroom was evident in the tense atmosphere. Case number 2025 CV 1432, Williams versus Pembroke Solutions. The clerk announced at 10:45 a.m. The sisters approached the podium, their steps measured and slightly uncertain, exactly as they had practiced. Maya clutched a folder of receipts and contracts, while Kyra held on to their business records. Judge Harrison barely looked up from his papers as they stood before him. "State your names for the record," he said, his voice already carrying a note of impatience. "Maya Williams, Your Honor," Maya said, deliberately letting her voice shake slightly. "Kara Williams, Your Honor." Kara followed, matching her sister's nervous tone. The judge finally looked up, his eyes scanning them briefly before returning to his papers. "You're representing yourselves in this matter?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied. "We couldn't afford a lawyer, but we know we're in the right here." Harrison's lip curled slightly at her words. "I see. And you understand the complexities of civil procedure, the rules of evidence, the burden of proof." "We've done our research, Your Honor," Kara answered, noting how he spoke to them as if they were children. "Research," he repeated, the word dripping with condescension. "Well, let's hear your complaint. In simple terms, please." Maya stepped forward, her hidden recording device capturing every word. "We run a cleaning service, Your Honor. Pembroke Solutions hired us for a major office cleaning project. We completed the work exactly as specified in our contract, but they're refusing to pay the full amount." "And how much are we talking about?" Harrison asked, still not making eye contact. $8,000, Your Honor," Kara said. This finally got his attention. He looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and skepticism. $8,000 for cleaning? "It was a 3-story office building, Your Honor," Maya explained. "We have all the documentation of hours worked, supplies used, and the signed contract specifying the services." Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying them with what appeared to be amusement. "Ladies, are you familiar with the concept of contractual obligations? The necessary elements of a binding agreement?" The sisters exchanged a glance, noting his patronizing tone. This was exactly what they had expected. "Yes, Your Honor," Kira responded. "We have a written contract that clearly states." "Ms. Williams," Harrison interrupted, "let me explain something in terms you might understand. Just because someone signs a piece of paper doesn't automatically make it a valid contract." The defense attorney for Pembroke Solutions, a young white man in an expensive suit, smirked at the judge's tone. He hadn't even needed to speak yet. Judge Harrison was doing his work for him. "Your Honor," Maya began, "we understand basic contract law. We've been running our business successfully for 3 years." "Ms. Williams," Harrison cut her off again, "I'm trying to help you understand the reality of your situation. Perhaps if you had consulted with actual legal professionals before filing this claim." The sisters stood quietly, absorbing every condescending word and gesture. Their hidden cameras captured his dismissive expressions, the way he spoke down to them while being perfectly cordial with the defense attorney. After 15 minutes of what felt like a lecture rather than a hearing, Harrison set a date for the next session, 2 weeks from today. "And ladies, I strongly suggest you reconsider your position, or at least consult with someone who understands the law." As they left the courtroom, Maya and Kira maintained their dejected expressions until they were safely in their car. "Got it all?" Maya asked, checking her recording device. Kira nodded, already sending the footage to their team. "Every word, every gesture. Did you see how he barely let us speak? And how he assumed we couldn't understand basic legal concepts?" Maya added. "This is just the beginning. Wait until he sees what we have planned for the next hearing." They drove back to their temporary office, knowing that Judge Harrison had just given them exactly what they needed. clear evidence of his prejudiced behavior. The trap was set, and he had walked right into it. In the 2 weeks between hearings, Maya and Kira worked tirelessly to build their case stronger. Their temporary office in the modest part of town became their command center, where they meticulously documented and analyzed every aspect of their encounter with Judge Harrison. "Look at this," Sarah Chen said one evening, replaying the courtroom footage. In the span of 1 hour, Harrison interrupted black defendants 17 times. White defendants? Only 3 interruptions, and those were polite. The sisters sat at their small desk, surrounded by papers and laptops. They had changed into their simple clothes again for a meeting with their cleaning staff. Actually undercover law students helping maintain their cover story. "The pattern is clear," Kara noted, updating their evidence file. "It's not just us. We documented similar treatment in 12 other cases this week alone." Maya was reviewing feedback from other defendants who had appeared before Harrison. Their investigative team had carefully reached out to previous cases, building a comprehensive picture of the judge's behavior patterns. "Listen to this testimony," Maya said, reading from her notes. "Judge Harrison spoke to my lawyer normally, but when I tried to speak, he acted like I was stupid. Made me repeat myself 3 times before saying he couldn't understand my accent. This woman has a PhD in chemistry." Their colleague, Detective Rodriguez, dropped by with more evidence. "We got some interesting financial records," he said, placing a folder on their desk. "Harrison belongs to some pretty exclusive clubs, the kind that have had discrimination lawsuits in the past." The sisters were building their case layer by layer. Every piece of evidence was carefully documented and verified. They knew that when they finally revealed themselves, their case needed to be bulletproof. One afternoon, while they were preparing for their next hearing, Rachel Thompson called from the courthouse. "You need to hear this," she said, her voice urgent. "Harrison was just overheard in his chambers making comments about your case." The sisters put the phone on speaker as Rachel played a recording. Harrison's voice came through clearly. "These cleaning ladies think they can walk into my courtroom and demand thousands of dollars? They probably don't even know how to file proper paperwork." Maya's hands clenched into fists, but Kyra placed a calming hand on her sister's shoulder. This was exactly the kind of evidence they needed. "There's more," Rachel continued. "He's been making similar comments about other cases. I've documented dates, times, and witnesses." The sisters worked late into the night, refining their strategy for the next hearing. They knew Harrison would expect them to come back discouraged, maybe even ready to drop the case. Instead, they planned to surprise him with perfectly prepared documentation and legal arguments. "We need to be careful," Kyra warned as they reviewed their plan. "If we appear too knowledgeable, he might get suspicious." Maya nodded, adjusting their strategy. "We'll present everything as if we've been getting help from a law library. Make it look like we've been studying hard, but still keep some rough edges." Their team had also been monitoring Harrison's recent cases. They discovered a disturbing trend. Cases involving minority defendants were being scheduled for shorter hearing times, often rushed through with minimal consideration. "The statistical evidence is damning," James Peterson said during their weekly review meeting. "When we compare hearing durations, ruling patterns, and interruption frequencies, the bias is clear." The sisters also spent time maintaining their cover. They took on actual cleaning jobs, worked with their temporary staff, and built a convincing paper trail. Every detail had to be perfect. As the next hearing approached, they prepared their evidence carefully. They would present just enough to keep the case going but hold back their strongest arguments for the perfect moment. "Tomorrow's hearing is crucial," Maya said the night before. "We need him to show his true colors again, but this time we'll push back just enough to rattle him." Kira reviewed their documentation one last time. "Everything's ready. The recording devices are charged, the paperwork is perfectly imperfect, and our witnesses are prepared." They went to bed that night knowing they were getting closer to their goal. Judge Harrison thought he was dealing with 2 simple cleaning ladies who would eventually give up and go away. He had no idea that every dismissive word, every condescending gesture was being carefully documented and would soon be used to expose his prejudiced behavior to the world. The next morning would bring them one step closer to justice, and Judge Harrison one step closer to his reckoning. The second hearing started differently than the first. Maya and Kira arrived at the courthouse dressed in slightly better but still modest clothing. They carried organized folders and walked with more confidence, though still maintaining their careful facade. Judge Harrison's eyebrows raised slightly when he saw their improved preparation. The sisters had positioned themselves exactly where they wanted to be, appearing as determined underdogs who had done their homework, but still far from revealing their true expertise. Case number 2025 CV 1432, the clerk announced. Williams versus Pembroke Solutions, continued hearing. The sisters approached the podium, and Maya spoke first. Good morning, Your Honor. We prepared additional documentation as requested. Harrison leaned forward, his usual mask of condescension firmly in place. I trust you had time to reconsider your position, Ms. Williams. Actually, Your Honor, Kira responded, pulling out their carefully prepared documents. We spent the past 2 weeks researching similar cases and preparing our evidence. The judge's expression darkened slightly. He hadn't expected them to return so well prepared. Very well, proceed. Maya began presenting their case, intentionally stumbling over some legal terms while articulating others perfectly. She watched Harrison's face change as she spoke, noting how his patronizing smile grew increasingly strained. Your Honor, Maya continued, we have photographic evidence of the completed work, signed inspection reports, and emails from Pembroke's office manager praising our service. Harrison interrupted, his voice sharp. Ms. Williams, are you aware that email correspondence doesn't automatically constitute Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code, Your Honor? Kara interjected, then quickly added, we found that in our research at the Public Law Library. The judge's face flushed red. The defense attorney for Pembroke Solutions shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing something wasn't quite right. Ms. Williams, Harrison said, his voice now carrying an edge of anger, I don't appreciate being interrupted in my courtroom. Perhaps where you come from. Where we come from, Your Honor? Maya asked innocently, while her hidden recording device captured every word. Could you please clarify what you mean by that? The courtroom grew tense. Harrison realized his mistake, but couldn't back down now. I simply mean that in this courtroom, we follow proper procedures. This isn't some neighborhood dispute. Of course, Your Honor. Kira replied softly, exchanging a meaningful glance with her sister. We're just trying to ensure justice is served equally for everyone. Harrison's grip on his gavel tightened. Let me be very clear, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Your amateur attempt at legal argument is wasting this court's valuable time, if you've had any real understanding of the law. Which laws specifically are we misunderstanding, Your Honor? Maya asked, pushing just enough to provoke him further. The judge's composure finally cracked. This is precisely what I mean. You people come in here thinking you can simplay. He caught himself, but it was too late. The words you people hung in the air like a thundercloud. Maya and Kira maintained their composed expressions, but inside they were triumphant. They had finally gotten exactly what they needed, an undeniable display of prejudice, caught on record. Your Honor, the defense attorney interrupted, perhaps sensing the dangerous territory his client's case was entering, perhaps we could take a brief recess. Harrison seized the opportunity. Court will recess for 15 minutes, he announced, practically fleeing from the bench. Once outside the courtroom, the sisters hurried to the bathroom where Sarah Chen was waiting. We got it, Maya said, her voice trembling with controlled excitement. The mask finally slipped. You people, Kira quoted, shaking her head. Plus all the interruptions, the condescension, everything caught on camera. Sarah quickly downloaded the footage from their recording devices. This is perfect. Combined with the evidence from other cases, it's undeniable. The sisters took a moment to collect themselves, knowing the next phase would be crucial. They had pushed Harrison to the edge, and his mask had cracked. Now they needed to prepare for the final confrontation. Ready for the next round? Maya asked her sister. Kira nodded, straightening her simple blouse. Let's go make some history. They walked back toward the courtroom, knowing that the next time they entered, everything would change. Judge Harrison's day of reckoning was approaching faster than he could possibly imagine. When court resumed after the recess, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Judge Harrison returned to the bench, his face still flushed from his earlier outburst. He shuffled his papers, clearly trying to regain his composure. Let's continue, he said curtly. Miss Williams, do you have anything else to add to your amateur presentation? Maya stepped forward, straightening her shoulders. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Yes, Your Honor. But first, I'd like to address your earlier comments. Harrison's eyes narrowed. I've warned you about proper courtroom behavior. Speaking of proper behavior, Kara interrupted, stepping beside her sister. We'd like to introduce some new evidence. The judge banged his gavel. That's enough. One more word out of turn, and I'll hold you both in contempt. Maya smiled, and for the first time, her Harvard-educated confidence shone through. Actually, Your Honor, you might want to hear us out before making any more hasty decisions. The change in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Gone was the nervous cleaning business owner. In her place stood a confident legal professional. What is the meaning of this? Harrison demanded. Allow us to properly introduce ourselves, Kara said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out her Bar Association credentials. I am Kara Johnson, senior partner at Peterson and Associates. And this is my sister, Maya Johnson, also a senior partner. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harrison's face went from red to pale in seconds. The defense attorney from Pembroke Solutions dropped his pen, his mouth hanging open. This is ridiculous, Harrison sputtered. You can't just. We can and we have, Maya interrupted, her voice clear and authoritative. For the past month, we've been conducting an official investigation into your courtroom practices, specifically your treatment of minority defendants. Kyra stepped forward, laying out documents on the presentation table. We have extensive documentation of your discriminatory behavior, statistical analysis of your rulings, recorded instances of bias, witness statements. This is outrageous, Harrison shouted, rising from his chair. I'll have you both disbarred. I wouldn't recommend that, came a voice from the back of the courtroom. James Peterson, their firm's senior partner, stood up. Everything they've done has been completely legal and properly documented. The courthouse doors opened, and several people entered. Representatives from the Judicial Conduct Committee, civil rights attorneys, and even a few reporters who had been quietly alerted. Your Honor, Maya said, her voice now carrying all the authority of her years of legal experience. We have documented 47 instances of clear bias in your courtroom in just the past month. The numbers show that you interrupt minority defendants 3 times more often than white defendants. You dismiss their motions twice as frequently. You impose harsher penalties. Harrison slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. This was all a setup. No, Your Honor, Kira corrected. This was an investigation. One that you made very easy for us by displaying exactly the kind of prejudiced behavior we were documenting. The sisters proceeded to lay out their evidence methodically. They played recordings, showed statistics, and presented sworn statements from previous defendants. With each piece of evidence, Harrison seemed to shrink further into his chair. We're filing a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Committee, Maya announced. All our evidence will be submitted for review. And our law firm will be representing several of your previous defendants in appeals. Kira added. Pro bono, of course. The members of the Judicial Conduct Committee approached the bench, their expressions grave. One of them, a senior judge, turned to Harrison. William, I think you should step down for the day. We need to discuss this immediately. As Harrison rose on shaky legs, Maya and Kira gathered their evidence. The courtroom buzzed with excitement and shock. Reporters were already scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Oh, and Your Honor, Maya called out as Harrison reached the door to his chambers. We actually do understand legal terminology quite well. Harvard Law School tends to teach that pretty thoroughly. The door closed behind Harrison with a final thud. The sisters watched as their carefully laid plan reached its culmination. They had exposed not just one prejudiced judge, but shone a light on a systemic problem in the justice system. As they packed up their materials, they knew this was just the beginning. Their case would send ripples through the legal community and hopefully inspire change in courtrooms across the country. The days following the courtroom revelation were a whirlwind of activity. News of the Johnson sisters' undercover investigation spread rapidly through legal circles and media outlets. Their story captured national attention, sparking intense discussions about judicial bias and discrimination in the legal system. "Look at these responses," Sarah said, scrolling through her tablet. "Law schools want you to give guest lectures. Civil rights organizations are calling for SIMI." The evidence they had gathered was overwhelming. The Judicial Conduct Committee's preliminary review showed that Harrison's bias wasn't limited to their case. Years of court records revealed a clear pattern of discrimination that had gone unchecked. "We've received over 200 calls," Kara said, reviewing their messages. Former defendants from Harrison's court wanting to appeal their cases. Other lawyers reporting similar behavior from different judges. "This is bigger than we imagined." Maya was organizing a team of attorneys to handle the appeals. Each case needs to be reviewed carefully. Some of these people spent years dealing with unfair rulings. They deserve justice. Their office had become a hub of activity. Civil rights attorneys from across the country were reaching out, wanting to learn their investigation techniques. Law students were applying for internships, inspired by their bold approach to fighting discrimination. The FBI's Civil Rights Division called, James Peterson announced, entering their office. "They want to expand the investigation to other courtrooms in the state. They're using your documentation methods as a template." The sisters had also received messages from other minority lawyers sharing similar experiences. Many had faced subtle discrimination, but hadn't known how to prove it or fight back effectively. "We need to turn this into something permanent," Kara said, looking at her sister. "A systematic way to monitor and address judicial bias." Maya nodded, already sketching out plans. "What if we created a nonprofit, an organization dedicated to court monitoring and judicial accountability?" Their phones buzzed simultaneously, another news alert. Judge Harrison had announced his resignation. The official statement cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The evidence against him was insurmountable. "His resignation isn't enough," Maya said firmly. "The system that allowed his behavior to continue for so long needs to change." They worked late into the evening, developing proposals for judicial oversight reform. Their plan included regular court monitoring, statistical analysis of rulings, and mandatory bias training for judges. Rachel Thompson, their courthouse contact, brought more news. "Other judges are nervous," she reported. "They're reviewing their own records, changing their behavior. Your case has them worried about their own conduct being examined." The sisters also received unexpected support from unexpected quarters. Several senior judges, concerned about the integrity of the justice system, reached out to back their reform proposals. "Look at this," Kara said, reading an email. "The state Supreme Court Chief Justice wants to meet with us. They're considering implementing our monitoring suggestions statewide." The human impact of their work became clear as former defendants began sharing their stories. People who had felt powerless in Harrison's courtroom were finally being heard. "A woman called today," Maya said softly. "She lost custody of her children in Harrison's court 3 years ago. The bias in his ruling was clear. We're reopening her case next week." Their law firm had become busier than ever. Beyond handling appeals, they were now conducting training sessions for other attorneys on recognizing and documenting judicial bias. "We've got requests from law firms in 12 states, Sarah reported. "They'd all want to learn how to run similar investigations." As evening fell, the sisters finally had a moment alone in their office. They looked out at the Boston skyline, reflecting on how far they'd come from that first day in Harrison's courtroom. "Did you ever think our little undercover operation would lead to all this?" Kira asked. Maya smiled, thinking of all the people they were now able to help. "We didn't just expose one prejudiced judge. We're changing the whole system." Their phones buzzed again, more interview requests, more cases to review, more people reaching out for help. The sisters exchanged determined looks. They had started something important, and they were just getting started. "Ready for tomorrow?" Maya asked. Kira nodded, gathering her files. "Always. We've got a lot more work to do." They had shaken up the justice system, but their real achievement was giving hope to those who had lost faith in it. The fight for true judicial equality was far from over, but they had shown it was possible to make a difference. 1 year after their undercover operation, Maya and Kira Johnson stood at the podium of Harvard Law School's largest auditorium. The room was packed with students, professors, and legal professionals eager to hear from the sisters who had changed the face of judicial accountability. The past year had brought remarkable changes. The newly established organization, the Judicial Accountability Project, JAP, had offices in 12 states. They had trained hundreds of legal observers who monitored courtrooms across the country, documenting patterns of bias and discrimination. The numbers don't lie, Kara continued, clicking to the next slide in their presentation. Since implementing our monitoring program, we've seen a 40% reduction in discriminatory judicial behavior in participating courts. Their work had sparked a national movement. The American Bar Association had adopted their guidelines for identifying and reporting judicial bias. Law schools were now including their case study in their ethics curriculum. After the lecture, they returned to their Boston office, which now occupied an entire floor. The walls were lined with news articles and thank you letters from people they'd helped. Their team had grown to include dozens of dedicated attorneys and researchers. "We got the final numbers from the Harrison cases," Sarah announced, entering their office with a thick report. 312 cases reviewed, 78 verdicts overturned due to proven bias. The sisters had made sure every single person who faced discrimination in Harrison's courtroom had their case reviewed. Many families had been reunited, sentences reduced, and civil judgments reversed. The state Supreme Court called, James Peterson said, joining them. They're ready to implement the mandatory bias training program statewide. They want you both to help develop the curriculum. Their success had come with challenges. Some judges and legal professionals had resisted their reforms, claiming they would undermine judicial independence. But the evidence they gathered was impossible to ignore. "Remember that cleaning business we set up as our cover?" Maya asked, smiling at her sister. "The workers we hired wanted to keep it running. It's now a successful employee-owned company." Kyra laughed. Who knew our fake business would become a real success story too? Their phones buzzed simultaneously, another success story. A judge in Texas had just been removed from the bench after their monitoring program revealed systematic discrimination against Hispanic defendants. "We're making real change," Maya said softly, reading the message. "Not just in courtrooms, but in people's lives." Their work had also inspired others. Young lawyers across the country were starting their own court monitoring programs. Law students were choosing civil rights law in increasing numbers, inspired by their example. The president's office called again, their assistant announced. "They want you both on the new Judicial Reform Commission." The sisters exchanged proud looks. Their small undercover operation had grown into something they never imagined. A national movement for judicial accountability and reform. Later that evening, they visited their old temporary office in the modest part of town. The cleaning business that had been their cover story was thriving, and the employees greeted them warmly. Sometimes the best changes come from unexpected places, Kara reflected as they walked back to their car. Maya nodded. Who would have thought that pretending to be cleaning business owners would lead to cleaning up the justice system? Their phones buzzed again. More cases, more requests for help, more opportunities to make a difference. But now they had a system in place, a network of dedicated professionals working toward the same goal. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Maya asked her sister. Kara smiled. "Always. We've got work to do." As they drove back to their office, they passed the courthouse where it all began. The building looked the same, but what happened inside had changed dramatically. Monitors now observed every courtroom, bias training was mandatory, and statistical analysis of rulings was standard practice. Judge Harrison's old courtroom had become a training center for their program. New judges attended sessions there, learning about unconscious bias and fair judicial practices. The sisters had transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for change. Their story was now taught in law schools, not just as a clever undercover operation, but as proof that the justice system could be made more just. As the sun set over Boston, Maya and Kira Johnson continued their work, knowing that every case they reviewed, every judge they monitored, and every person they helped was another step toward their goal, a truly equal justice system for all.